Good afternoon, and welcome to this week's IDB panel entitled COVID-19 and the New Abnormal of the Workplace. I'm Van Noah, a program director at the Institute for Defense and Business in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. It's my pleasure to host and moderate today's program. The IDB greatly appreciates the many alumni, friends, and supporters who joined us today, and those who participated in our panel entitled Pandemic and the New Normal for Logistics. It was a very interesting conversation, and we appreciate your participation through questions to the panel and responses to the survey we sent to all the registrants. For those of you new to the IDB, thank you for joining us. The IDB has been serving the defense community, including all military services, the DoD, other governmental and non-governmental organizations, allies, and our private sector partners with executive education programs and research for the past 22 years. It's our mission and our passion. We are blessed to be supporting all of you in accomplishing the good work that you do every day, particularly in times of strife like these. All of the panels our team at the IDB have arranged over the years have been about an opportunity for you to interact with experts. That's our intent with these digital panels as well. After a brief introduction of panelists, I will ask each of them to share some opening remarks, and then we'll all enjoy their interaction as they help us understand the challenges that each of us is facing or will be facing as we deal with the new abnormal of the workplace and move forward to whatever that work will look like coming out of this pandemic. We plan to get to the Q&A session quickly, so for those joining us through the Zoom conference registration, please use the Q&A tool that's shown at the bottom of your screen to submit your question. Phil Buzzy and Sabrina Warner are helping manage the panel behind the scenes, and we will get to as many questions as possible in the hour we have. As we know, the energy involvement in our panels is always up when the Q&A part is underway. Please feel free to submit questions for the whole panel or specific panelists anytime, even now. The chat function is also available for participants, and we'll monitor that as well. A recording of this panel will be available in the next day or so and provided to all who registered. We have 1 hour for this panel, so with those ground rules in place, let's begin. As the pandemic came upon us, our nation was asked to isolate, social distance, and stay at home. The response around the world has been impressive and compassionate from a health standpoint, yet crushing and not sustainable from a mission and business perspective. We need to get working again, and as leaders, discover what that means as we fight through the next phase of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our panelists, like many of you, are involved in businesses and missions that are designated as essential, so could not shut down, and their organizations had to figure out how to keep operations going while protecting their workforce, suppliers, and customers. Let's hear their perspective on the people, processes, and technology aspects of that challenge today, as well as their strategy and thoughts for the future. The IDB has assembled a knowledgeable and approachable panel of experts. Let me introduce them before asking their opening statements. First, Lieutenant General John Cooper, an IDB Executive Fellow and Senior Vice President at AAR Corporation, which is an independent provider of aviation services to commercial and government customers worldwide. At AAR Corporation, he focuses on shaping and executing strategy for growing their government and defense business. He served 35 years in the United States Air Force, serving in many capacities and commands, culminating in his assignment as Deputy Chief of Staff for Logistics, Engineering, and Force Protection. That position is most commonly known as the A4. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration from the Citadel. He holds a master's degree in both business management and strategic studies. And one credential we're all proud of, he's a graduate of our LogTech program and was a great advocate for education of all logistics and maintenance professionals in the Air Force. Our second panelist is Mr. Jim Brunke, President and CEO of Kalogridis International. Jim retired as a senior executive at the Boeing Company after a 40-year career in aerospace engineering and logistics. In separate assignments at Boeing, Jim served as director for all Boeing commercial and military maintenance, repair, and overhaul facilities. For the past decade or so, Mr. Brunke has been a senior mentor and faculty for IDB, an instrumental part of LogTech, Lifecycle, our AirP programs, Log 21, and our industrial base broadening programs. Jim served in the U.S. Air Force early in his career. He's an engineer and holds a master's degree in business administration. And our third panelist, Mr. Kevin Ruelas, acquired Syndetix Incorporated 4 years ago, realizing his dream of owning his own company and assuming the role of CEO. Previously, he was a CEO at Channel Technologies Group, where he helped the family transition to a $40 million enterprise, integrating 3 separate companies and managing the sale of that high-value asset to a private equity firm. Kevin has also been a CEO at Intera Solutions, a government information technology company. The IDB met Kevin shortly after he founded Agility Defense and Government Division. He started with 2 sales representatives and was instrumental in transforming Agility from that small logistics provider to one of the largest service providers for the Department of Defense. Kevin served as an infantry officer for 5 years early in his career. He has a bachelor's degree in education and an MBA from the Kelley School of Business with an executive certificate, McKean & Flagler Business School at UNC Chapel Hill, and the IDB. That's where we got to know him. His classmates called him the Godfather, and true to his entrepreneurial spirit, we spent most of our overseas residency attempting to recruit the sharpest employees from every company we visited throughout Europe. Welcome to each of our panelists. In our conversations leading up to this panel, each of you has shared some insights into how you and your organizations have responded to the challenges of working since the pandemic hit. Starting with General Cooper, please share a few thoughts to kick the panel off.
Yeah, thanks, Van, for that warm introduction, and I look forward to hearing from my distinguished panelists that are on with me today to hear what's going on in their industry. The only change I would make to your introduction is I wouldn't have called it the abnormal workplace. I think it's going to be the normal workplace for the foreseeable future, and I'll try to lay out a couple of thoughts here and then look forward to the questions and answers. I mean, I can come up with just maybe a handful of industries or sectors where this pandemic hasn't just turned it inside out, really down to the family level. And in this pandemic, we're really looking at things in terms of the family. Take my family, for instance. I have a family members. One's a teacher trying to teach from home while managing the kids. I have one in the restaurant business. I have one in the military, in the Army, who started his deployment in the middle of March, only to be frozen in place, awaiting COVID, and is still there today before they go out, fully deploy forward for a year. I have one family member who is in the IT sector and actually has been working in business collaboration tools since before that was cool. You know, before the pandemic even started, so she's busier than ever. And of course, I'm in the aviation business now, and the aviation business, of course, is hurting just like every place else. So, you know, every one of those has been turned inside out, and business is left just wondering, what they're going to do now. They're not only fighting the disease, but they're fighting the psychological effects that this disease has left with not only customers, but with the employees. So, and they're doing all this while they're waiting for while they're working on probably the largest economic challenges, certainly I believe in my lifetime, probably all of our lifetimes, the economic challenges that businesses are facing now. So, you know, when I was in the Air Force, we practiced all the time to operate in a chemical environment, and we'd be challenged to wear protective gear, masks and gloves and protective gear, and try to launch as many sorties as we could. And when it was all over, it was an exercise, of course, and at the end there'd be a declaration called ENDEX, which would stand for end of exercise. With this pandemic, I don't see an index in sight. So businesses now are struggling with how do I look at this the longer term. I'll bet if you were like me 6 weeks ago, I was kind of hoping for a Hail Mary. I thought, hey, we have the smartest people in the world. Somebody's going to figure out how to fix this. And 6 weeks later, I think we're sinking in that this is for the longer term. So businesses now have their legs on both sides of the fence. One is quarantine in place and be completely safe. The other fence is, and hey, I have to open up and generate some commerce so that we can stay alive. And that's where we find ourselves today. I mean, I think across in all sectors, which is why we're seeing, you know, the tension that we're at. So the big dilemma in my eyes is how does a business position itself both through policies and procedures and maybe technology for the longer term, meaning I'll say a year before we can figure out how to kill this thing with a vaccine or with some other type of thought. So I'll leave you with that, and I look forward to the questions. Thanks.
Thank
I'll
you,
just say,
Tom. Jim?
I completely agree with the general in terms of how this affects all of us. And I would say if someone asked me what the new normal was, I would say chaos and uncertainty. But I also want to kind of back off and say in the last 100 years, we've had 5 major pandemics, 2 nuclear meltdowns, innumerable hurricanes that have destroyed entire cities and countries. So this isn't new. We've gotten through it in the past. This isn't the end all, but I think there are things we ought to be doing to protect ourselves. So when this first hit us, we found out we were an essential industry and we had to do some things quickly to keep the business running. So the very first thing we did is we obtained information channels and revenue opportunities. We put a group of people together and we said, who should we trust in terms of information? What information should we need? And where can we get maybe grants, loans, additional money so that we have something to fall back on if we can't maintain our business ourselves? And so we started establishing daily reviews of CDC, WHO, making sure that we had the current information. Information you should be getting is worldwide, like the World Health Organization. You ought to be getting federal information on what's going on with CDC, what the federal government wants you to do. You ought to be getting state and local information, and you ought to make sure that those feeds are constant and that you trust them and you're willing to act on what they say. The next thing you ought to be working on, again, what the general kind of referenced is make sure you're taking care of your people, your business, and yourself. You're going to have to put policies in place. There's things you've learned that you might want to alter in your business, but you need to make sure that you've got all of that battened down. So you got people that are able to come into work, they feel safe, you feel safe having them there, and you feel that what they're doing is effective in running your business. And then the last thing is that you ought to say what's next. And what's next comes in a bunch of different categories, but let's just lay a couple of them out. What's next is how am I going to start up and get into an operation that I believe is sustainable and my business can continue to run in the future. We can talk more about that later. The other thing we ought to look at is, as someone once said, in the midst of chaos, there's also opportunities. And we ought to be strategically looking at what has changed in our environment and how can we capitalize on it. Classic MBA kind of stuff. What's your strengths? What's your weaknesses? What opportunities are out there? What are your threats? How did your supply chain work? Is there anything needed to be changed on that? What businesses are thriving right now? And do you have capabilities within your business that will allow your business to thrive like them? And then what are things that you're doing now that maybe you should stop doing because, quite frankly, it's just not going to be the correct model in the future? So I think I'll end my introduction there, but the start is I think this is a time that we're operating very tactically, but we should be thinking very strategically and asking strategic questions about how we ought to be operating tactically. And we ought to make sure that we're maintaining our plan when it comes to implementing the strategy that we've thought about. With that, I think I'll leave it to Kevin.
Thanks, Jim. And I also want to say thanks to Van and the team for putting this together and inviting me to be part of it. This is kind of new and exciting for me. Speaking of new and exciting, you know, we live in a new and exciting world now. And I think everything has kind of changed on us, as Jim and John both pointed out, that we were all kind of caught a little bit flat-footed. And I myself was personally in London at a conference when it all started to break, came back to try and figure out, okay, what was the new normal, or not even new normal at that time? What's going on and what do we need to do? Syndetix as a corporation has 2 parts to it. We actually manufacture a device, and we have the typical HR function of personnel out at bases around the world. We have about 100 employees, and so I had to quickly figure out what does that mean for my employees, my employee base. Honestly, the easy answer was for all of those that were on bases like Fort Hood or Yuma, they just continued to work as usual and did whatever the government employers said they needed to do, and they went into work every day with their CAT card like they normally did. It didn't change much for those workers, but for the workers I had at the manufacturing plant actually making our products, it became an immediate, what do we do now and how do we deal with this? Going back to Van's introduction, commenting on infantry officer days, my first reaction was to build an improvised foxhole, if you will, because we didn't know what was going on and how long it would last. But now we're starting to realize and starting to understand that we need to really dig in and create full-on foxholes, because this is going to last longer than any of us expected. I too was hoping, like the general, that there would be some magic silver bullet coming. It doesn't look like it. This is the new normal, and this looks like what we're going to be faced with for 6 months, a year to come. And so with that, we had to start looking at how do we protect our employees, as Jim talked about, how do we protect our supply chains, and how do we figure out to continue to move forward as an organization. We're fortunate in that we have a lot of space in our facility. We were quickly able to expand everybody's workspace so that we could distance ourselves, institute masks, institute cleanings, institute a lot of the things that are now becoming a new normal for everybody. But we were able to keep working and to continue to keep the doors open and continue to supply our primary customers with their much needed equipment that they use every day on the front lines, not in the pandemic, but in law enforcement and military circles. So with that introduction, kind of giving you how I came into it and where I'm coming from, I look forward to the questions as well and discussing more of some of the things that we've done. I know my fellow panelists and we've all talked about amongst ourselves in the past some of the things that we've done, and you'll hear probably some of the same things from them that you may have experienced yourselves, and look forward to your questions. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Van.
All right, thank you, Kevin. And one of your MBA classmates gave us a little heads up on some questions, Eric Strauss. One of the things, and you talked about the investment, that what you are going to do for the future, and his is a lot on the real estate. In our previous conversations, there's been some discussion about the different types of work and the ways you're approaching it, social distancing, but his was really on it seems like there's going to be a big hit on the real estate market, change in the way we office and respond or work from a distance. What would that mean for your company? What do you think it means for the government, and what will we do with all of this space, or what will it look like?
Well, yeah, definitely that goes back to some of the new normal. I think a lot more distance discussions, Zooming like we are now, a lot more interactions are going to be done from a distance, a lot more people are working from home. I think that is going to continue for quite a while. The impacts on the commercial space from that perspective, I think, are going to be long-term, rather large over time, but it's going to take time for all of that to play out, because people are going to probably, or offices or businesses are going to contract some of their space. But then again, as I said, using my extra space, I was allowing for more social distancing. So I didn't necessarily want less space at that time. But as we start to move into this new normal, I think the typical commercial space that we've been seeing just exponentially explode all over the place, I do expect there to be a downturn in that going forward as businesses start to change the way they do business and become more virtual. More people are starting to learn that they can work from home. The working from home isn't the end of the world. It's actually got a lot of benefits to it. A lot less commuting, a lot less traffic, a lot less issues. You can roll out of bed and be at the office in 5 minutes. So there are a lot of good things to being online. But I do think there will be huge changes in commercial real estate. I would say it'll take months before it all starts to pan out, though.
To Kevin's point, sorry about that, not looking at the real estate market from an industry perspective, but just looking at how we deal with real estate, I think we are going to see a shift in our facilities to some degree. I think, Kevin's mentioned the social distancing. If you have the right size facility, that works very effectively. I think you're going to see people going to multiple shifts for administrative people where they typically work just day shift. One of the things we did is we put half our office staff on a second shift so that we could increase the distancing. I think people are going to find that that home offices, distance work, telecommuting, whatever buzzwords you want to use, does save an employer money. I think it forces us to look at new work measurement practices. Rather than observing an employee working for 8 hours a day, we're going to have to assess the products that they produce and the services that they're providing and how that value is measured. I think that a lot of those things are going to ultimately get into a situation where employers may look at downsizing. They're going to find they don't need quite the office space they needed. And if they downsize, the rent cost goes down. So that's good money into your pocket if you're a business.
John, you'd mentioned different types of work and the touch labor and the different approaches you guys have been taking at AAR and planning out in the coming year. Have any comments on it?
Yeah, there's a lot. AAR is not only, we have offices, of course, all over the world, 6,000 employees in multiple locations, but we have a lot of touch labor and supply chain, warehouse management, that kind of stuff. So that's unavoidable. People have to come to work and really kind of do the job. Couldn't agree more with Jim's comment about what employers are looking for offices. We're doing all that kind of stuff where we're looking at different shifts, how to spread people out. Some people stay at home, some people stay at work. Even if it's a cubicle, have it geographically mapped so you get the 6 feet of separation, so to speak. We're looking at that in our location. But when you get to the hands-on labor, it gets a little more challenging. But having said that, I mean, we've already, I'm sure, I know in my industry it's happened. I'm sure it's happening everywhere, but temperatures before you start work, making sure all the PPE is provided by the employer. Now we're looking at, hey, in our world, it's a lot of it is carded maintenance, where you have to do a job maybe together because one person has to inspect the work of another person. We're actually implementing some pretty cool stuff there, and it's funny how use the calamity to come up with a good idea or implement a good idea. We've been looking for years at trying to get our artisans, our 7 levels in the military, where there's not very many of them, have used technology to help them review the work of many others through video cameras, those kind of things, where you can have hands-free. We've actually implemented that with the FAA since the COVID crisis here. We were working with them previously, but instead of FAA doing surveillance, in-person surveillance inspections, which is largely paperwork, some material inspections and those sort of things, we had the technology, we bought more of it, and we are testing it at one location with the FAA now, where they're not coming out to do the FAA surveillance. They are doing it remotely with a camera and uploaded files, even up to and including looking at material and those sort of things, talking with technicians about how they did the work and so forth. So not complete yet, we're in the test phase, but we're taking that same technology and moving it out to what I alluded to before, where a supervisor can inspect, I'll say, a fuel pump installation on an aircraft from a technician remotely, and he or she can look at multiple technicians, so there's an efficiency piece there, but you're also not putting both people in an enclosed space within 6 feet of each other, which helps. So there's probably more. I mean, people think of great, they just come up with great ideas in a crisis like this. Heck, we just had our first, we're AS 9100 certified. We're very proud of that at AAR. And we just had our very first virtual audit by a third-party auditor, because we want to maintain that, that compliance. And it was 100%. Guy did it from his backyard in Georgia. We sent him all the documentation. We had personal interviews. So he, largely did the documentation review there, did personal interviews, oral tests, those type of things. And it was really a learning event for all of us. But I think that's probably the future. And I think my colleagues, based on their comments, I think they agree in things like that. Find where you don't have to come together and don't come together. It can save money for the organization.
Yeah, John, that brings up.
Let's stay on that. Yeah, let's stay on that digitization stuff and sort of innovation that's coming from that. There was a question related to that. I think it's a good way to segue into it.
Yeah, I think that the big unspoken elephant in the room right now is the fact that a lot of us are going to have to rethink our IT systems. We're using a lot more of the computer systems today to communicate, and we have to wonder how vulnerable those are to industrial espionage or any kind of espionage. But that, frankly, do your employees know how to work remotely from home using the IT tools? I noticed that one of the chats was about education, and Van, we can certainly discuss how many hours we're spending talking about how do we do distance learning now rather than to put students through airplane terminals and into hotels and into crowded restaurants and eating together. So there's many challenges around the IT area that that we're all experiencing from different directions or different problem sets. And I think that's going, if you're going to invest money right now in your company infrastructure, I think it goes into the IT/cyber category. And I saw a comment about how the cost savings from overhead by having a smaller facility leads to profitability. And I truly believe it does that, but it also, we're going to invest a lot of that money into cyber infrastructure.
Kevin, you have some thoughts on what sort of technologies you guys are leveraging or starting?
Well, definitely. I mean, that was one of the major concerns we had immediately when we started having people work from home. And we identified those in finance, HR, et cetera, that could work from home or work remotely. And then we needed to make sure that they had firewalls in place and proper protocols. Like most defense contractors, we also have a security DSS program in place, and we have to constantly be going through briefings every year and periodic updates so that everybody knows security is paramount. So, you know, being on top of all of that, and even more so as a defense contractor, I've seen a lot of statistics lately about how big the problem is becoming for small business defense contractors to, they're getting spammed and even spoofed a lot more often than ever before. So it is definitely a big challenge and problem that we needed to be ahead of and have been working on ever since this all started and we started having more and more people remotely. And I think, you know, going to Jim's point and the question regarding education and remote education, also, I think that is another, just like real estate thing that is going to play out over time as you have more and more, especially higher education institutions that are going to be challenged with not only downwardly trending attendance because people can't travel, especially international students coming to the US to attend classes, but you're also going to have challenges with the amount of money people are willing to pay to do virtual classes versus in-person classes. So I think there is a big upheaval coming also for higher education and the way we currently have been doing it. So I think there are a lot of things like real estate, education, et cetera, that are really up for a lot of change in the new normal.
Yeah. I mean, this pandemic is really it's an accelerator to a lot of good ideas that were out there, but you couldn't justify the funding, so to speak. I think those are now coming to the forefront and say, why don't we dust off that good technological idea and relook it because we really need it now. Because there was a lot of innovation that was ongoing, but just frankly, especially in DoD, just couldn't make the cut. And I think that's an opportunity.
Well, that's good. Go ahead.
Opportunity to be had here. I mean, you know, there's a lot of doomsaying with all the new normal and all the things that are going to change for us, but there is also a lot of opportunity. There's going to be a lot of things that can be either acquired or propped up or brought forward, or the opportunities will abound as we move forward. I mean, everybody's heard of Zoom now, when 2 months ago, nobody'd even heard of Zoom, for example. So I think the opportunities are there. I think a lot of the virtual meetings, virtual spaces, things like this are going to continue to proliferate, and there will be more and more opportunity. But it is also not without challenges. And I think one of the questions that I saw earlier that I thought was a great question is, how do you manage remotely in these times? And for me, that's been one of my biggest challenges. I'm used to being very hands-on, very involved in the day-to-day operations, walk around by management, seeing my staff, and you can't do that as easily remotely, obviously. So keeping that esprit de corps is a huge challenge remotely.
Yeah, that
Yeah, from
really is a challenge there. I mean,
Okay.
I'll tell you, Kevin, I couldn't agree with you more. I was given a business section while the pandemic was ongoing, like since I've been at my house. So I'm in charge of the people that I met them once, a couple of them once, and not everybody else. So we're talking all the time. You know, it gets into the you really you know, I'm an advocate for intrusive leadership. You know, you really need to get to know your people and understand your people, and it's ever more so paramount when you're separated. You know, and you're only virtual, and many times not even looking at people like we are today. You're just talking, and that's how do you lead in that? The more intrusive, the better. From where I sit.
I think that's good. From what Jim was saying on the education work we've been doing, we're looking for those things that are done even better in that digital environment, because we know we can't replace a lot of those things that are done best face to face. So we're looking for the strength in that. You guys have some insights you can share on sort of you shared a couple, but other things strategically where you're looking where this is a great new opportunity that others that are listening could learn from.
Let me take a shot at that first. First, I want to say I agree totally with Kevin and John also that this is an opportunity. We can look at this as a glass half full or a glass half empty, and I'm going to say it's half full and look for those opportunities out there. There's some things that I think we can say, though. I think that agile and resilient organizations are going to rule in the future, or survive. Maybe that's a better term. I think small teams are going to be more inclined. I think Lean and Six Sigma opportunities to some degree are going to slow down. I think we've lost some confidence in our supply chains. And so we're going to have to change some of our strategies about the supply chain activities that we do. And I think buffer stocks on certain critical parts are going to come back, whereas in Lean, they told you don't do that. And I think it bit some people. And so I think we got to rethink our applications of Lean, which means we're probably going from efficiency to effectiveness in the way that we go forward. Certain things that are big opportunities out there on the world right now, I think teaming, mergers and acquisitions, joint ventures, there's strong companies out there and there's weak companies out there. There's companies that have saved and had money in the bank, and there's others that didn't. And I think all of those are going to create opportunities that we ought to think our way through that make our business stronger and maybe bring in someone else's business. So I would spend a lot of time looking at M&A. You know, is there someone out there you can buy, or is there someone you can sell yours to at this point in time? Can you team with someone that has strengths that fill in your gaps and weaknesses? I would be spending a lot more time looking at business relationships with other people than I had been in the past, perhaps.
Yeah, so I know that Jim was with Boeing, and Kevin's the CEO of, he makes things. AAR doesn't make anything. We repair, we overhaul, we supply. But we work a lot with government, and we're using this opportunity really to try to convince some areas in federal government to use some best commercial practices in terms of aviation, supply chain maintenance, those type of things. Buying Part 145 serviceable used parts to supply. You can save money. It's widely available, even more so right now. Those type of things, I think, where we're trying to innovate and help our customers innovate so that we can be more responsive to their needs. And really, on the government side, I'll tell you the government side of at least my business, there has been no slowdown. It's full speed ahead on the government side, and so people are listening on how we can inject the money that's been given to the government to get the industry using new and best commercial practices has been the way we've been pushing.
Yeah, and I would add, we're a little bit insulated and lucky, I guess, in the defense sector, and that the government is still spending money and still active. I was just reading a study saying that the RFP to the RFI to RFP timeline has actually gone down slightly. A lot of that is COVID related because of them trying to get contracts out ASAP and get things bought and purchased. But even if you take that out, there has been a lot of contracting activity, and it's not just DoD, but when you talk about government and DHS and Health and Human Services, et cetera, there's a lot of activity going on. So there is a lot of opportunity. To Jim's point, there's a lot of buying going on. Unfortunately, the government is still spending money to keep the economy going and keeping us all employed, I guess, and keeping us busy as well. So it's good news, bad news. But at the same time, I just want to say bye to my classmate Eric as I headed out. Shout out to Eric there. Thanks for giving me some tough questions. But as far as when can we get back to the new normal, I saw that as a great question. And I think a lot of things need to start to happen. Most importantly, the ability to test quickly and efficiently at the workplace so we can say whether or not people are safe to be in the building and safe to be at work is probably one of the highest requirements that I would see before we're able to just act much more normal. The ability to go to conferences, get on planes, all of that is related to being able to test and being able to know who has been sick, who is sick, or who is contagious. And I think that is one of the first big steps, and there's many other ones, but that one's the first one that came to my mind on how we get back to normal.
And a lot of that timeline's unknown, yet the work still needs to be going. So on that line of bringing your customers new ideas from a business development standpoint from the private sector, but also from seeking out new ideas, understanding new products from the government side, being able to see those things at conferences. How can we do that without the ability to have all these conferences and go see each other? What are your thoughts from either side?
I would offer that we hold on until next year, because we got to get together for things like that. Humans interact. There's no doubt about it. And some things can't be, just like I can't change that a maintenance technician has to get on an airplane with somebody else and fix it. We can try to mitigate it. But for new products and like trade shows and those sort of things, we will get back to that. I think it would, how we work in the middle is going to be, it's not going to be pretty. I'm getting invited to a lot of virtual conferences and those type of things, and we'll see how effective they are. But I think in the end, we just got to mitigate where we are, control where we are, and get through this until there's a vaccine and we get past it, so our economy can really start growing and get back to trade shows.
Yeah, I would say that we have to recognize that there's probably going to evolve from where we are right now, which I would call a kind of a national lockdown, to probably regional lockdowns. And, as hot spots emerge, they're going to have to shut those down and get those under control. And so you could be a company that's just chugging away doing the right thing, and then 2 weeks later, you're told you got to lock everything down and send your employees home. And I think that's going to keep going on at least through the end of this year. And I think John's right. We've got to just hang on through 2020 and then see where we go from there. Oh, one other thing.
Go ahead.
In all of your contracts, almost every contract that everybody has, there's a term and condition in the back called force majeure. And you are in the middle of a force majeure right now, and you ought to understand what that means in terms of performance in terms of that contract. It gives you some excuses, but it also puts some requirements on you. So go back into your contracts, review what force majeure means to you, and decide whether you want to exercise any of that discussion with any of your customers or your suppliers.
Well, on the idea of getting back and holding on, there were a number of questions that have been, the buzz in the media and amongst people. So there's, what are your thoughts on what is too fast, all the way to this herd approach, like in Sweden, just to rip the Band-Aid off and get it done. Your thoughts on sort of what the pace should be in the coming year or however long you think it is.
I thought Jim was going to jump on that.
That's a hot potato. There you go. Good.
Grenade.
The infantry.
Well, first off, I may have slept in a Holiday Inn Express last night, but I'm not a doctor, so I've got to just go by the advice of what they tell us. Right? But it seems to me that at the moment, given the condition where we work out of in Dallas, and I live in the state of Washington, which have taken two different approaches, by the way. Washington's taken a very cautious approach. Dallas has taken a much more aggressive approach. So that's going to give me some opportunity to see the differences. But right now, it feels kind of okay in both cases. Washington kind of straps you down a little more, but lets you have a little more latitude. And in both places, we're not seeing huge increases in cases. So I'm just going to keep an eye out and see what happens. But I'm okay with the pace we're on right now.
I mean, I think it needs to be a measured approach. There's a desire in many areas to just go back to normal now, and I don't know that that's prudent. But results with my workplace, my company, we're all over America, and each state is really handling the opening a little bit different. So we have in multiple states. The opening or what we can do with our company is a little bit different depending on the state. So it's a little frenetic on what output we can manage coming out of this and getting through it.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're right now on the cusp of kind of figuring all of that out and seeing how it plays out, because most states, I'm in actually Colorado, most states are relaxing a lot of the rules right now, and I'm actually very curious to see what happens over the next 2 weeks. Does everything start to go up? Does everything start to go down? I think that will tell us a lot about what happens next. And until we get some of that data, I'm not sure we can decide what we're going to do until we find out, I guess, what this relaxation is going to do to the numbers.
Right. We got a question. Go ahead.
One other thing, I think that it's just starting to come out in the media now, and the discussions are just starting. And that is what metrics should we be looking at to determine whether we're getting better or worse? Just knowing how many cases are out there and how many deaths probably is not enough data for us to know what's going on. Increase in cases could be directly related to the increase in testing that you're doing. So there may not be any more people catching it. You just may be detecting it in more people that already have it. In the death side of it, there's a lot of people. I think it was Dr. Burks the other day that said that she wants to tone down the amount of deaths because a lot of deaths that were attributed to COVID-19 may not have been, that may not have been the cause of their death. They may have died and just happened to have COVID-19 antibodies in their system when they died. So I think there's a couple more pieces of information that we need to have. As someone said the other day, if you got bit by a shark and you died and they tested your blood before they buried you and you had COVID-19, you would be put down as your death was a COVID-19 death. And so there's some filtering that's going back, and people are looking and saying, did we really do this correctly or not? And I think that's going to take a couple weeks to kind of sort out the metrics. But we all know that to run an effective business or an effective plan, you got to be looking at the right metrics. We've looked at a lot of metrics that gave us a sheer gross picture of what was going on. I think it's now time to refine that so that we can start making some informed decisions.
Yeah, I would only add that I mean, this is why I opened in my opportunity for opening comments on the psychology of this disease, because it's, we can measure it with a micrometer and cut it with a chainsaw, but until people feel safe, until customers feel safe and employees feel safe, this is going to be a real challenge for business. So one of those metrics probably needs to be the soft skills of understanding what do our customers feel like? Do they feel like it's time to come back to work, or feel like it's time to go shopping, or feel like it's time to go out to eat, or whatever industry you're in? Because it's the psychology that's really got that's really where we are right now.
This next question's fairly specific, but probably a great takeaway for people that are watching. Can you share some of the specific technologies, communication methods, platforms, ways that you go about doing your work with your workforce now that you can't be face-to-face that they could learn from?
Well, we were, my company, the AAR, we were doing Zoom before Zoom was cool. I showed up and we were doing Zoom already. So I guess I lucked into it. So we just migrated right to that. But we have a number of collaboration tools that, I mean, they're all out there. So you really just got to search for those tools. I mean, I don't want to necessarily name one, but I just named Zoom, I guess, but we're on Zoom, so that's okay. You know, there's a number of collaboration tools out there that let multiple, you know, we do a lot of you know, business proposals for federal work. That takes an enormous amount of people to collaborate on a product, and where you would normally do it in a conference room, we're doing it with, you know, I'll say 20, 30 people overnight. Just people looking at it, collaborating. All those collaborations go together, and a master editor, you know, takes it, and away you go. You know, there's those kind of tools already out there. If you're looking for something like that, they're not hard to find.
Yeah, there's online whiteboards. I use an online whiteboard a lot that you can use. You take your iPad and you hook it right up into your laptop through Zoom, and you can have a meeting like this, and I can show you whiteboard activity. At the same time, there's stickies, you know, like you use the yellow stickies in team collaboration things. There's virtual methods to do that. I'm kind of with John. They're all out there. Just Google what you want, and you're going to find it. So that doesn't seem to be a problem. Just picking one is probably your bigger problem.
Well, yeah, and I think like John, I kind of came into it already doing a lot of virtual work. I think virtual work is more normal now than it was 5-10 years ago, definitely for most businesses. So we had, you know, Skype for Business, we had Zoom, we had Google Docs, so you can collaborate at the same time on different documents, or at the same time on the same document. There's a lot of technology that was already kind of ready for us to just keep using or use more of it in this current distance activity that we're all experiencing. So I don't know that we, at least in my company, have found a new one, you know, whether it's Slack or one of these other type of opportunities. We don't use them. I think the biggest one we use now that we've always used is texting. I text more than I ever have. You know, 10 years ago, I text with all of my VPs. I text all the time with my sales team. We're always using text. It's easy, quick, you know, one sentence, answer question, boom, move on. And so I think there's a lot of technology that's already ready for us.
Right.
Yeah, I would want to just
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just want to give one perk out to anybody in DoD who's listening, because DoD has kind of said Zoom is verboten, but so we're willing to respond. I mean, as a you know, supplier vendor for DoD, we'll do whatever DoD wants to do, but we don't know what DoD wants. We're hoping to find out soon, so we can get it and we can work with them. That was my plug. Thanks, man.
Yeah. Well, you guys at AAR are amazing. All right. So here's one. You talked a little earlier about the efficiency and effectiveness and sort of the balance between those two. A big term that was used previously, but probably will take on new meaning. What does supply chain resiliency mean to each of you now?
Well, to me, well, first off, I think this gives us an opportunity, well, resiliency, the ability to operate a supply chain without interruption, and to be able to alter and change it to meet your changing demands while not, I'll just say, dropping the ball. But it also means probably looking for second source suppliers in a lot of cases. That was an old Boeing playbook, is always have someone on the grandstand that could come into the game if your current player couldn't do the job. So I think having an alternate source is always a good thing. I think rethinking what critical means to you. in terms of your parts and the materials that you require. And I think that's going to require some buffering. You're going to see people keep safety stocks in certain areas higher than others. I think we will question certain nations and whether we ought to be operating with that particular nation or not. And it may not, you know, as soon as I say that, everyone goes, oh, China and hostile politics and all that. Well, yes and no, but I also look at Canada and Mexico as huge opportunities for us. The logistics of getting an airplane part or an automotive part or any part out of Mexico to our factories in the United States is a whole lot faster and probably just as cheap as shipping something from China. So a lot of the advantage that China had 10, 15 years ago in labor rates and in shipping costs has kind of gone by the wayside. Their labor rates aren't that much cheaper. And so I think this is a great time to reassess your supply chain, or I'd like to say this, it's a good time to reimagine your supply chain. Consider all the risks and figure out what you want to do to it to make it more effective. Look at the people out there that are effective. I'm amazed that Amazon's doing as well as they are, given the current conditions. There's a lot of lessons to be learned from folks like them, FedEx, UPS. And I think, like I say, get a group of people together, what did not work in your business, and reimagine it.
Yeah, I would add for, you know, in my sector where I'm working with DOD, you know, one thing that just strikes me, I mean, it strikes me that industry will supply what they're allowed to supply to perform the contract that they sign. Many contracts are 2 years with 3 or 4 option years. So you only really have 2 years of guaranteed work, and then you have to, you know, you have to worry about option years after that. Whereas if you had long-term contracts, a company might invest in that stock that's needed. That's kind of across all of DoD. I would say that echoing Jim on nations and watching where the parts are coming from and having the pedigree on those parts, very, very important. You know, I don't know that we will put a lot more parts on the shelf, only because that's the secret sauce of all industry, you know, have the right amount. But if you had longer term contracts, you could do a better job at that. So
one observation I'll make regarding the contracts and sourcing is that, you know, even in this time of social distancing and being virtual, it actually was pretty important that we had relationships with our vendors early on, because one of the first things that happened to us, for example, is that we were deemed essential and we stayed open, but our board maker shut down because they were just making circuit boards. They weren't a defense contractor. But the fact that their circuit boards went into my defense product made it a very important supply chain issue for me, to the point where we could call them, have a conversation with them, explain to them what was going on, and have them continue to deliver our boards to us so that we can continue to manufacture. And that was a long way of going back to saying that it was a relationship that we had developed as a supplier-supplyee that allowed us to, you know, have those conversations and keep those supply chains open. So I think, you know, in the future, resilience is going to also still be an important part relative to that relationship development, making sure you have good relationships with your suppliers, but then also, to Jim's point, the secondary suppliers, backup suppliers. And I think there's, you know, plenty of ways, documented ways to make sure your supply chain doesn't go down. And I think a lot of people are learning that the longer the supply chain, the more hiccups that are possible in your supply chain, obviously. So a lot of people are looking to shorten them. Having said that, everybody has short-term memory, and in 5 years, I'm not sure how much of that's going to continue to be remembered, and we'll probably go back to the least common denominator, which is the dollar, but we shall see.
Speaking of resiliency, there was one or items that got everybody's attention that they wished we had more resiliency, and it directly affects workers and your ability to work. It's the personal protective equipment and the access to it, your ability to provide it to your employees, and if you could just talk about your views of how it's doing so far and what you need to do into the future.
Well, with us, we got caught flat-footed. We didn't have a storage box full of masks and Purell and contact thermometers and all of that kind of stuff. We were lucky enough that we were on the front end of this. In the beginning of March, I'd come back from Europe and I saw that there was already some issues in Italy and some other places. So as soon as I got back, I picked up the phone and called my group and said, go out and get as many masks as you can find, Purell, surface contact thermometers, go do all that. We got all that stuff early on. We couldn't obtain it today if we wanted to. So one of the things it taught me was just like I have at home, a lot of us at home have a cupboard someplace with some emergency food in it and maybe some batteries and some flashlights and just stuff in case the power goes out or you can't get your food supplies disrupted for 10, 15 days. I realized I've got to have exactly the same thing in my workplace. And so I've got a team of people together. I said, what all other than masks, Purell, and thermometers should we be putting in there? And some people have even offered up, we ought to have some emergency food supplies and some things. But I think it's important to sit down with your group in your company and make a determination of whether you need an emergency kit someplace, what should be in it, and how long should you keep it for before it's reassessed. And I think that's now become, we had a person in our company that was our lead healthcare designator. If somebody got hurt, she was the first one on the scene. She was a trained EMT. And we've asked her to take a much more dominant role in watching our company in terms of social distancing and all that other stuff. So we've actually come up with, if you want to call it a hall monitor, that is required to put plans together and make sure that we're not caught flat-footed the next time.
All right. We got about a minute each if you guys want to say something before we have the closing comments and we're done with our hour.
Well, if I got a minute, I got one thing. Watch Delta Airlines. Delta Airlines is operating a brilliant strategy right now, and there's a lot all of us can learn from that. Yesterday, they announced they're selling their entire 777 fleet because they recognize that the capacity won't come back and they'll be able to buy up other people's slots on new aircraft manufacturing at cheap prices. So selling those airplanes gives them cash today, and then they went out and bought brand new airplanes at discounted prices they'll be picking up starting next year. That was a cool strategy. So look for companies that have great strategies and pay attention to them.
Yeah, triggering on that, I would say, in my last minute, there was a good question about what is all of the spending the government's doing going to do to the economy in the future. And I think we're in for a very, unfortunately, long haul here with recession, with a lot of prices going down or value going down in real estate. The stock market is a bubble right now, I think. But there's a lot of things that are going to go badly with the amount of spending we're doing. GDP, I think, is supposed to get up to 50% being debt. But at the same time, there's tons of opportunity. Jim was just talking about the airlines. There are tons of opportunities that are going to be coming down the pike, if you will, and there will be plenty of things that people that are looking forward and being resilient or forward-looking, there are going to be lots of opportunities, and everybody should be on the lookout for those opportunities.
John?
Yes, I just, after the Spanish flu, America had one of its most prosperous decades, about 3 years after the Spanish flu, the 20s. So it was, this will pass. It's going to be hard. I think I agree with Kevin. I think there's going to be some challenges here over the, with the amount of spending and all that. But I think the world will get through it. I'm curious to see what's going to stick from the new normal and then continue on into the future versus what's just it's going to be a mitigating effort. I think that will be exciting in business as we go forward. So I'm looking forward to being a part of that.
All right. We've run out of time before we ran out of questions, which is the best way to end the panel. Thank you, General Cooper, Mr. Brunke, Mr. Ruelas, for a very enlightening conversation today. We appreciate all you do collectively. and for taking time this afternoon. To our audience, thank you for your questions and participation. If you'd like to hear more on this topic or have great suggestions or for additional programs, please let us know in the survey that you'll receive if you registered for the program. Please also follow us on our LinkedIn and Facebook pages, where you could also give us suggestions for new topics. Our next scheduled digital panel will be in the first week of June, hosted by Ambassador David Litt on the whole of nation approach, our national strategy, the interagency, state roles, federal agency coordination, including the DoD. Once again, a link to the recording to this webinar will be sent to each of you. Thank you for tuning in, and please stay safe. So long.